Now we've got Senator Amy Klobuchar. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, thanks, Brian. It is wonderful to be on again.
So we just celebrated the 1 year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Your bill served as the basis for the provision in that law that allowed Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices. This is something that Democrats have been trying to do since forever. Now,
Correct.
the list of drugs whose prices can be negotiated was finally released. What drugs were chosen and how were they chosen?
Okay, so first of all, it's not quite forever, but about 2 decades ago, the big pharma companies got this sweetheart deal written into law that you can't negotiate prices for 50 million Americans, which, by the way, for people who aren't seniors who happen to be listening, it sets the tone and the amount for a lot of other drug negotiations as well. So it's going to make a difference for anyone. So what did they do? Well, they chose blockbuster drugs that were set at what I believe are artificially high rates. Drugs like Xarelto for blood clots, drugs like Eliquis for blood clots, diabetes, just those two I just mentioned. Nearly 5 million people use them. Drugs like Jardiance, Januvia, those are diabetes drugs. So here's the unbelievable statistic. Those 10 drugs they picked for different psoriasis, blood cancers, last year, up to 9 million seniors spent 3.4, ready, billion in out-of-pocket costs for these 10 drugs. So can you imagine what we can do when we start adding 15 more drugs, which is next year, 15 more drugs, then the next year, 20 more drugs. And so this idea, I mean, I would have liked to do even more sooner, but this is the negotiation, what happened. But we're finally going to unleash the power of Medicare to negotiate, which just doesn't help seniors. It's going to help everyone.
Now, when you say that Medicare will be able to negotiate lower drug prices, is there still the possibility that these pharmaceutical companies can figure out a way not to negotiate in good faith or not to put our prices on par with what the rest of the world would pay when they negotiate lower prices?
Yeah, it's like 250% more we're paying, by the way, while our taxpayers are investing in the research. Is there a way they could manipulate? Well, I'm sure they're going to do every way to find something.
Right.
Clearly an astute question. However, right now, number one is they're suing in court. They've got 9 lawsuits going on, all these high-priced lawyers. They have 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. That's why with the president's leadership, we were finally able, he's the first president that got this done, despite all the talk by everyone else. And they also are spending hundreds of $1 millions, have spent, will spend in ad campaigns. So let me tell you how they manipulate. They manipulate with this sweetheart provision that we're now taking on. They also manipulate with a patent system. So what they do is they get a drug locked in for a long period of time, and then they make a tiny little change, It's called product hopping. So they make a change to it, and then they say, oh, it's a new patent. Now we're locked in for 10 more years. So we actually passed a bill out of judiciary bipartisan to deal with that. They file sham petitions to stop it. Senator Grassley and I have a bill to stop that. And then this is the real unbelievable part. Major pharmaceutical companies pay off generics, their competition, to keep their products off the market. It's called pay for delay. And Senator Grassley and I also have a bill. All of these came through Judiciary Committee in the last few months. Not an easy committee to get bills through, as you know. And we did that. So now those are headed to the floor. So I think taking them on in their lawsuits, which the administration is doing, the Justice Department, continuing to implement this and be very strong in negotiations. And then, as you point out, looking at the other ways they're getting around it by passing these bills. It's not just one size fits all. That's why we did the insulin cap, $35 a month. That's why we did the free vaccines for things like shingles and pneumonia. That's why we've got the $2,000 out-of-pocket cap. All those things passed and are being implemented already. The free vaccines are in for seniors. But then you got to look at everyone else. And it's hard enough to get this passed for seniors. You can imagine when we've got AARP on our side, what we're going to be dealing with everyone else. But we can't stop here because they have literally owned Washington, but they don't own me, and they don't own a number of other people that are willing to take them on, including the president.
Well, to that exact point, is there any indication as to how all of those bills that are working their way or that have passed committee that are working their way to the full floor of the Senate for a vote, how they'll do? Because, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but Republicans haven't exactly been falling over themselves to pass any of this legislation anyway. I mean, there was no Republicans who voted for the Inflation Reduction Act.
And thanks for making that point, Brian. So on the big ticket item, the Medicare negotiation that we led talking about with those 10 drugs that are going to be negotiated over the next year, we didn't get one Republican vote on that. I've never gotten leading the bill with 34 co-sponsors. They were all Democrats on that bill. So that's the one that we did with that 51 vote margin, that dramatic overnight of voting where they were like literally seeing if someone will fall over so we lose a vote. That's how close our margin, and no one did.
Which is a tough risk in the U.S. government. Could be rough sometimes.
We got it done. So that was no help. These other bills I mentioned on patents, we do have some bipartisan support for those bills. And so that is helpful because we've got to get it through the House as well. And we're not going to have one of those 5-day votes over this bill and over the patent bills, right? So I've got to find, at least not this year. So I've got to find another way to do it. And that's with the Republicans. So the hope would be to get them attached or have a week of votes just on this, and then we push them over to the House, and then it's on them. They better get it done because people are really mad. Like 80-90%, depending on what the question is, the American people are with us on that. They're pissed off because they know that they put the money into the research, taxpayer money, and they also know that's why people go up to Canada on buses to get less expensive drugs. People in my own state have done that. So people are really attuned to this issue. And that is good for those that are trying to make change, which is the Democratic Party.
Well, and the benefit of this, too, is that this would be a bill, or these would be bills narrowly focused on lowering drug prices and making sure that your drug prices do stay down. And so it would be more difficult for Republicans to vilify as this like nebulous attack on democracy or whatever they claim it's going to be, when it is just narrowly focused on bringing the prices of drugs down, which is not to say they won't attack it anyway, but at least it'll be easier for people to recognize what these bills actually do.
And I think that's really on people's minds right now for obvious reasons. And so the work that we are doing as the Democrats to bring childcare costs down, which we're having trouble getting them on board on that, when you ask people what they care about, ticketing, they care a lot about bringing costs down for their families right now. I mean, they care about jobs and good paying jobs. And there's an incredible record that the president and those of us in Congress that have helped get us through the pandemic, helping our workers, helping our businesses, that has made a difference. And so, because they're the ones that get the jobs. And now I will say the cost thing is really on people's minds. It always has been. And if you are too afraid to take on these big interests, then you're not going to be able to make progress. And so this was a major, major win and a major victory for the American people that we're finally negotiating these drugs. And they're not just, let's pick out 10 piddly drugs.
Yeah.
All that money in out-of-pocket costs. I realized it in August everywhere I went after the announcement was made, at the Minnesota State Fair, at Labor Day events, just in a parade, people would come up and they're like, look, my mom takes the Xarelto, or, I take this Eliquis. It was kind of extraordinary. They actually would mention the drugs to me. They were very attuned. And that's a problem for the people that are opposing us and for the candidates who are saying, oh, I'd roll this back. People are going to not only know what we have done with the insulin cap and with the free vaccines for shingles and the like, but they're also going to know what they're expecting to get down the line. And that's why I feel so good that we have been united on this.
And when do these lower costs go into effect?
So the ones I mentioned, which are big ticket items, a $35 limit on insulin, that's in effect now per month for seniors. What's interesting, and I predicted this would happen, some of the drug companies, major ones, have now said we're going to extend that to non-seniors. It's sort of hard to explain why you're charging a kid $100 a month and the senior is $35. So they're actually voluntarily doing it. And then we'd like to pass a bill for that $35 limit. The free vaccines, that is now. So people on Medicare can get their shingles, and which was costing them money. The $2,000 cap is 2025. That's for all out-of-pocket pharmaceuticals. And then the negotiation we're talking about goes on. I think the prices first hit in 2026. But everyone would love to do it sooner, but that's just because the negotiations are going to take a while. I think people are going to know what's happening, and they're not going to want to rock backwards. But then when we start adding 15, 25 drugs, I believe those negotiations are going to go faster and faster.
How does allowing Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices like this actually save the government money here?
Well, think about it. The government, when I mentioned that copay number for our seniors, that's just they're paying out of pocket. The government is paying, in some cases, the bulk of this with the Medicare coverage for pharma. So the government is paying a lot of money, billions of dollars, for these drugs. So any kind of negotiation, and we do have a benchmark. The Veterans Administration, the VA, gets really good prices on negotiations for our veterans. They should be able to do that. Medicare's been banned from negotiating. And so as a result, the sweetheart deal has allowed the pharmaceutical companies to get whatever they want from the government, from out of pocket for seniors, for the price of these drugs.
Now, this is a bit tongue in cheek here, but if allowing Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices lowers costs for Americans and it saves the U.S. government money, why don't Republicans support it? Why didn't we get a single Republican to support the Inflation Reduction Act?
Because we have looked at every side of this for any arguments they've made on things like innovation. We got an independent, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office score on this that just showed that wasn't the fact. They say these things, and in the end, you got to follow the money. You got to look at the fact that there's 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress, and they put hundreds of $millions in an ad campaign, and that's where they're standing. We're standing on the side of where the American people are.
Okay, and let's finish off with this. How does it work in terms of adding more drugs in the future? Is there any way that could be blocked? Is it written into the law that we will continue to see more drugs added ad nauseum, or is there a cutoff? How does this work?
Good. Starts with 10. Next year, they add 15. The year after that, 15 more. The year after that, 20. I think it gets up to 80.
Okay.
So if you're looking at this as a voter, as a citizen, you've got to look at the fact that you want to keep in that direction and add more drugs. Senator Sanders and I would have done all of them, honestly. You got to look, do you want to go in that direction? Or do you want to go backwards? Because you're right, it's just written into law. Our president, working with a Congress that didn't agree with us on this, could reverse it just like that. The other way it could be reversed, which I believe we're going to triumph, is in court. They are claiming, the pharmaceutical companies are claiming that it's some kind of a taking, that they're being forced to do this. It's very ironic because they don't have to provide drugs to 50 million seniors, right? That another company could, or something like that. So they're arguing that it's some kind of a judicial taking, a legislative taking of their property, which just shows the hubris that they operate under.
Right. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Again, as I end up saying every time you're on, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I'm sure it's going to impact, tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. So with that said, Senator Klobuchar, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. It was fun to talk about this in depth, as usual, with you, Brian.